This one's for PZ Myers. PZ, I've been reading your blog for some time, and I find a lot to like about it, but there's a lot that I disagree with very strongly, although this is the first post I've actually seen that I really thought needed a response. I generally like you even when I completely disagree with you, so I'm not going to flame at you too badly.
We had another mass murder in America this week.
Oh no, why would someone do that?
There's no other way around it. It was by a nun, someone who hated organized religion.
Okay, it seems like you're starting a list of beliefs and positions that might have influenced this person, so let's put them up on the screen. Hatred of organized religion certainly could influence someone to commit a crime like this if they got too obsessive about it, so that's definitely going on the list.
And who described himself as not religious, but spiritual.
Alright, he wasn't religious, so he didn't do it because of religion. He was a self-identified spiritual person, though, and that sounds pretty harmless and ill-defined, so I don't know if that would have anything to do with it, but I suppose it's possible, so I'll put that on the list.
If he were participating in a survey, we'd embrace him as one of us, part of our growing majority.
Yeah, he'd probably check none on a survey.
He was also a conservative Republican, and if he were attending CPAC, we'd have atheists who'd enthuse about a possible recruit to the cause.
2 more for the list, conservative, Republican.
But instead, he slaughtered innocent people, so we turn around and pretend his disbelief had absolutely nothing to do with it.
You take action based on what you believe. For example, you don't kill people because you're not religious, but you might kill people because you really hate religion. Or you don't kill people because you're apolitical, but you might kill people because you hate politics.
It's all very convenient. If he'd been a Christian, we'd all sneer at the hypocrisy of all the believers who'd reassure us that he wasn't a true Christian, TM.
Yeah, of course we would, because that's an obviously false statement. If this guy was an atheist, he was as true an atheist as you or I. If he was a Buddhist, he'd be just as true of a Buddhist as any other. And if he was a Christian, he'd be just as true of a Christian as any other.
But now it's only reasonable that we rationally and calmly divorce ourselves from any responsibility. I don't accept that.
Excuse me? I don't appreciate your tone, sir. I'm no more responsible for a non-religious mass murderer than Joe Muslim next door is responsible for a Muslim mass murderer. I'm not acquainted with any atheists who speak in favor of mass murder, are you? Nor, most likely, is Joe Muslim acquainted with any Muslims who do. He and I would probably both distance ourselves from anyone who did and condemn them in the harshest possible terms, along with anyone who took those words to heart and acted on them. So what exactly does this have to do with me or atheists in general? If you're against people overgeneralizing after Islamic attacks by assigning responsibility to Muslims, why did you just do the same thing to atheists?
I agree completely with Ashley Miller's point that the myth of atheist superiority is dangerous and leads to terrible consequences.
Is that what you think this murder was about? I didn't think this kind of information had been found, and you didn't mention above that he was discovered to be an atheist supremacist or even an atheist. Either you've heard something I haven't, or you're just throwing out irrelevant statements. But I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and assume the former just to let you get on with your argument, so let's add another item to our list of possible influences: atheist supremacism.
Even if it wasn't causal, it leads terrible people to do terrible things to achieve that affirming sense of being better than everyone else.
Yeah, my point exactly. Just like the rest of the items on this list, if it's taken too far, a sense of superiority certainly could lead someone to this point.
It has to stop, and the first step is acquiring some sense of responsibility.
I don't believe that atheists are superior. I've known way too many abjectly stupid atheists to be under any kind of delusion like that. Losing your religion or never having one to begin with doesn't make you smart, even if it does make you correct on one issue. And I hardly know anyone who has this unjustified sense of superiority. I know of a few, but not many. So again, why precisely should I or they acquire a sense of responsibility? Am I responsible for the idiotic beliefs of some killer? Now let there be no confusion. I condemn him, I condemn his actions, I condemn whatever stupid beliefs caused him to go on this rampage. And if anyone's willing to defend him, then yeah, they should stop doing that. But I've never done it, and I never will, and nor has any atheist that I know. So stop trying to foist blame onto a group that played no role in this.
But of course, some of our self-appointed leaders want nothing to do with that.
They want nothing to do with acquiring responsibility for an event that has absolutely nothing to do with them? That shouldn't surprise you. Really, what you just said isn't even good enough to be called guilt by association because you didn't even bother to demonstrate any association at all. You don't know if this guy read anything by these so-called leaders unless you have some special insight that nobody else has. If you did, you could at least try to create a moral panic about those kids listening to Marilyn Manson and playing with them He-Man toys and playing D&D while they read the God Delusion. But you can't even get that far.
It never fails that if you want to see the insufferable smugness of delusional atheists, all you have to do is turn to PZ Myers. Sam Harris.
Okay, now we're into the Harris quote.
No rational atheist, or new atheist, holds religion accountable for every idiotic or unethical thing religious people do.
Actually, probably some new atheists do that. I've seen some who would identify as new atheists who really do spread blame too broadly, but in general, I get the point. Most of us recognize that individuals are individuals and subgroups are subgroups, and their actions don't reflect on everyone who shares a particular opinion. But on the other hand, apparently you, PZ, think atheists have responsibility for some wacko who shot up a school based on nothing more than he identifies as non-religious.
We blame a religion only for what its adherents do as a direct result of its doctrines, such as opposing gay marriage or killing apostates.
Yes, and this is as it should be. We shouldn't blame Islam for some Muslim getting pissed off about an IRS audit and shooting up an office building, and we especially shouldn't claim all Muslims are responsible for it. That would be indefensible anti-Muslim bigotry.
Atheism has no doctrines.
Until PZ manages to get his way, but yes, this is correct. Atheism is simply an absence of something. It's not that you say you are something, it's that you say you're not something. Are you a Muslim? No, I'm not a Muslim. Now, what do you know about this person's attitude toward human life? Not much. Almost certainly, this person has attitudes toward human life based on all sorts of good or bad justifications, but these attitudes, even if you slap the label atheist on them, are still ideas that are present, not ones that are absent, and therefore something different.
It does not demand that a person do anything or refrain from doing anything on the basis of his unbelief.
Right, again, unless PZ gets his way. And once that happens, we can all start calling the killer no true atheist because he didn't conform to PZ's dogma. And the Christians can start saying, hey, stop using the no true Scotsman fallacy, he was as much of an atheist as you are. And now we're in the same pointless scenario you described before, but with the roles reversed. You can say all you like that this wouldn't happen, but if you say that atheism entails feminism, for example, then it absolutely will happen whenever a non-feminist atheist does something. He's not a feminist, therefore he's not an atheist. Of course, you could add all these extra beliefs onto atheism and then not hold anyone to them, but then you'd be engaging in a meaningless exercise and implicitly acknowledging they're not actually linked at all. So what's the point?
Consequently, to know that someone is an atheist is to know almost nothing about him, apart from the fact that he does not accept the unwarranted claims of any religion.
Well, no, you can be a religious atheist, but clarify it with theistic religion and I'll agree.
Atheism is simply the condition of not believing in Poseidon, Thor, or any of the thousands of dead gods that lie in the graveyard we call mythology. To that extent, everyone knows exactly what it is to be an atheist. He's simply added the god of Abraham to the list of the dead.
Yes, and that's a totally neutral position. It's not in opposition to anything. If you take the position that believers in Thor are all bad people and need to be exterminated, that's a belief in opposition to something. Non-belief in Thor does not imply belief in the inferiority of Thor believers. Simply not believing is not enough to get you there.
If a belief in astrology were causing people to go berserk, to deny medical care to their children, or to murder unbelievers, many of us would speak and write about the dangerous stupidity of astrology.
Yes, or at least whatever particular version of astrology was involved, because the people are doing it because they believe in it. Similarly, if someone commits a crime because they believe atheists are superior to everyone else and other people deserve to die, we would speak out about the dangerous stupidity of that belief.
This would not be bigotry or intolerance on our part. It would be a plea for basic human sanity. And that's all that an atheist's criticism of religious tribalism and superstition ever is.
Not necessarily, but usually in my experience, yeah.
If you understand this, you'll recognize any attempt to blame atheism for specific crimes, great or small, for what it is. A fresh act of religious demagoguery.
Absolutely correct. If someone commits a crime because they believe in some form of atheist supremacism, then that is to blame for the crime. But to blame atheism itself instead is absurd. It shows a complete lack of ability to distinguish between distinct concepts. To try to conflate atheism with atheist supremacism would be similar to a creationist conflating evolution with social Darwinism. Yeah, you can find a relationship between them, but that doesn't make them the same thing. Of course, this is all academic, since we don't even know if this killer was an atheist supremacist or even an atheist. But again, I've granted it for the sake of argument.
Christ.
Okay, why do you disagree?
Humanity is suffering under a collection of half-assed ethical and moral principles assembled with no rational foundation but superstition, and with awful, damaging, exploitative rules mixed in with a few good ones.
Damn right, I think Sam would agree with you there.
Religion is primitive and lacking in any tools to address deep injustices and correct errors in its formulation.
In large part, yes.
I'm all in favor of tearing it down and replacing it with... what?
Moral philosophy, humanism, I don't know, empathy, justice systems, social contract. Make a list and take your pick.
According to Harris, nothing. Atheism has nothing constructive or productive to replace the bad system most people are limping along under. Rip it all out and apparently brute reason can be trusted to evolve something better.
If I didn't believe in God, why wouldn't I go around raping and murdering, right, PZ? Yeah, it's true. Atheism doesn't have anything to replace any other system. There are non-theistic systems, but these aren't inherent to atheism. When you try to wedge them in where they don't fit, you just end up creating more problems than you solve. All of a sudden you've got newly deconverted Christians and Muslims who are told they better be feminists right now or they're not true atheists, and can you guess where that kind of response will push them? Aside of that, why are you engaging in this religious-style thinking that assumes people are generally bad? Deconversion is not the process of taking good religious people and turning them into bad non-religious people. People generally stay about the same as they were before because the religion was never the core of their morality. There were other things holding them back from doing awful stuff. When someone deconverts, they might feel cast into an empty moral void, but they're actually not. There are countless systems of thought and moral compasses that they can latch onto, and they already latched onto some of them while they were religious. Atheism does not need to be transformed into another one of those systems. As I said, all that can lead to is more confusion and less acceptance of newcomers who might be open to the ideas of whatever philosophy is tacked onto atheism, but who aren't quite there yet. I really don't see any reason to drive current and future atheists away by redefining atheism as a system of rules, when you could just let atheism be the lack of theism and introduce fresh atheists to new philosophical ideas so they can choose what makes the most sense to them. If you argued well for your positions on social issues, you'd wind up with the outcome you want anyway. And you'd still have to convince people to accept your positions whether they were defined as part of atheism or not. Otherwise, they'd just throw them out or stop identifying as atheists.
Never mind that the same atheists who adore the irresponsibility of the idea that their beliefs impose no demands on them.
Your beliefs can impose demands on you. They don't necessarily do so, but they can. Who's asserted otherwise? In fact, Sam Harris has been engaged for years in an exhausting battle to convince regressives of just that. ISIS has nothing to do with Islam, my ass.
Are also the same atheists who so detest equality that they spit on feminism, that they so obliviously love their privileges that they scorn the whole concept of social justice.
Hold on. Now you're telling me that people who don't want to misrepresent atheism are anti-feminists or anti-SJWs? You really want to have your cake and eat it too? I mean, if you can't have atheism redefined to include feminism and social justice, you'll just redefine opposition to your redefinition to include anti-feminism and anti-social justice, even though that opposition could just as easily come from feminists and SJWs. If you can't convince people to join you in redefining atheism, you'll redefine them as opponents to your ideology. If people don't like how you mangle language, they're the devil. If unrelated concepts aren't being conflated, you feel like you're not doing your job right, apparently.
That they're so authoritarian that they rush to the defense of their leaders with a capital L, no matter how egregiously offensive their bigotry might be.
I don't care about Dawkins or Harris or whoever else you've appointed as a leader. They're no leaders of mine. As I do with anyone, I agree with what they say when it makes sense to me, and I disagree with all the rest. This goes for you too, PZ. Some of the stuff on your blog is actually pretty great, and I think that in a lot of ways it's good that it's around, but I strongly disagree with you on issues like this. No, I don't love Dawkins or Harris or you. I don't hate any of you either. It's not about the people, it's about the issues. When you're right, and when you're not, you're not. The fact that earlier I agreed with Harris doesn't mean I dogmatically agree with everything he says, it just means I've thought about what he says and found that I agree with it in this case. I really hope you do things the same way.
And any who dare to criticize them are harming the cause.
Prominent atheists must be criticized. In my opinion, it's critically important. That's why I'm doing this right now. It's probably why you criticized Sam earlier. Even if I disagree with the criticism, the fact that you criticized him is still good. It's a sort of informal peer review. It keeps us moving forward to better and better positions, which does the complete opposite of harming the cause. I wish more people would do it.
Reason is not enough. Reason can show you the best way to achieve a goal, but if your goal is mass murder or denigration of women, or the perpetuation of an oppressive hierarchy, it'll help you do that too.
I thought you were talking about how atheism, not reason, is being claimed as enough. Atheism and reason aren't synonymous or even inherently linked. How did reason even enter this discussion? Have we now switched to talking about how all the reasonable people bear responsibility for this killer's crimes? But yeah, reason will help you accomplish tasks, and no, reason alone is rarely enough to make a person act in a socially healthy way. Thankfully, I couldn't name anyone whose character consists of reason and nothing else. Who exactly are we talking about here? And what does it have to do with atheism? What does it even have to do with the killer?
We need purpose and value and meaning as well.
Well, we don't need it, but I agree that a person will have a much easier time remaining well-adjusted with these things, so sure.
And if a prominent leader of atheism is saying that atheism doesn't do that, that's a declaration that atheism is bankrupt and has failed totally.
Now we're back to atheism again. I feel like my brain's being shaken around, although that might just be from me bobbling my head while I talk. But anyway, atheism isn't bankrupt. It never had anything to begin with. You said reason isn't enough, and so you understand the concept. Atheism isn't enough either. If someone has no philosophy, no moral reasoning, no contemplation of their purpose or values or the meaning of their life, then atheism isn't going to give those things to them. Atheism is not a philosophy. It provides nothing whatsoever. It's not even a blank slate because you can actually write on a blank slate. It's
a great nothing.
Yes, it's a great nothing. It's a void, an absence. A lack of belief in Bigfoot gives me an equal amount of purpose and meaning as atheism does, which is precisely none. I know you don't like it, but it's a typical characteristic of negations of concepts to include nothing but the negation itself. If I relied on negations for my worldview, I wouldn't have much of a worldview at all. But luckily, I don't rely on atheism or a Bigfootism to determine my purpose or meaning. There's this huge pile of actual active beliefs and thoughts that form who I am and define who I want to be. But they're not atheism. I could have exactly the same thoughts even if I believed in God. Atheism is irrelevant to my character, other than that it means theism is irrelevant to my character. But you should notice that you've written yourself into a corner here. If you're trying to argue that atheism necessarily includes elements of a worldview, all you accomplish is to exclude people and call them not true atheists. And the defense that you're just trying to point out implications of atheism but not exclude people isn't available to you, because if you aren't trying to argue that atheism necessarily includes that worldview, then you actually understand that those elements are not part of atheism. And atheism actually is the great nothing that you insist it should not be. So you're either an exclusionary asshole or a dictionary atheist, and I don't think you want to be either of those things.
That's not my atheism, though.
It's really odd that despite your redefinition of atheism, a little while ago you were calling people atheists who don't share your views. Sam Harris, Chris Harper Mercer. You seem to actually realize that you can be an atheist without believing the rest of what you believe, and therefore that what you believe is not baked into atheism, so which is it? Look, you can define atheism however you want, but that doesn't change the facts. You lack religion, and you've built up your own moral system and belief system from other sources. They're not atheism, they're feminism and social justice and science and whatever else. If I had never heard of you and you came up to me at a conference and said, "Hi, I'm PZ and I'm an atheist," I would have no idea what you did in your spare time, or what purpose or value you assigned to anything, or whether you believed in reincarnation, or whether you were a rational person, or a conservative, or a spiritual person, or someone who hated religion, or a mass murderer, or anything. No idea at all. So I would ask, "Hi PZ, that's interesting. What's your opinion on mass murder?" For example.
I argue that the absence of gods gives greater prominence to the interdependence of the human community.
It doesn't necessarily. If you think the killer was an atheist, then isn't he a prime example? What you're talking about, again, is not the lack of belief in gods. It's the presence of belief in some sort of principle of social cohesion that isn't defined by theism. Again, that's not atheism.
And adds greater weight and urgency to the importance of empathy and equality and all those human values.
Again, I mention your atheist killer. No, if someone looks at the world and doesn't see a god, then they're atheist, regardless of any change they have in their opinions later. If after their deconversion they start thinking, so what does the absence of God mean for society? Now they're developing a social philosophy. But even if they never thought this ever in their entire life, they would still be an atheist. Sure, maybe becoming an atheist was necessary for them to be able to realize that they could even reason about such things, but that doesn't mean that this realization necessarily follows a deconversion. And if it doesn't, is that person worse for it? Are they any less of an atheist? Or are they just being true to themselves?
But if atheism is now a label that allows us to nonchalantly disavow responsibility for the actions of those within our own group, perhaps it's time to disband the whole idea of an atheist community.
No community is responsible for the actions of those within it unless that community generally promotes those actions. This is an unfair smear, not just on atheists, but on members of all kinds of groups everywhere. If you're a member of some group, you better make sure no other member ever does anything wrong, because you'll be held accountable. Painting a whole group with responsibility for the crimes of one member is sheer bigotry.
But then it's also clear that my vision of what atheism ought to be is a minority view.
Good! I would really hate to have to live in a world where individualism is considered a bad thing, and one individual is guilty by association for the crimes of another. It's barbaric, it's biblical.
The majority are doing their damnedest to confirm the poor opinion the believers have of us.
How? Really? This is a non sequitur. It follows from nothing that you've said so far. The majority, in general, is entirely willing to condemn anyone who commits a crime in its name. If it comes out that Mercer was an atheist and killed those people because of some sort of atheist supremacism, then I'll be the first to condemn him yet again and spit on his grave, and I'm sure there'll be plenty behind me in line. But I will not say that atheism is some sort of moral system or framework of values. Apart from the simple fact that it's false, it also does exactly what you're trying to avoid and confirms the poor opinion the believers have of us. If you say atheism implies specific beliefs, then the religious are going to look at someone like Mercer, who you've identified as an atheist, and say, oh, he's an atheist, so his values must be the values of atheism. That is not good for atheists. This is not good PR. No, if you want believers to have a good opinion of you, maintain a solid and well-reasoned moral position while also calling yourself an atheist. I understand that a lot of theists are very confused and they think that your position on God's existence and your position on morality need to be linked, but there's no reason to pretend this is true just to pander to them. It's better to educate them on why theism and morality are not synonymous and how they can be separated. That way you achieve two goals at once. On the one hand, you make it easier for people to drop their theism because they no longer fear that it's going to cause them to lose their moral system, and on the other hand, you make it easier for people not to think negatively about the entire atheist community when one atheist commits a horrible action, since the beliefs that drove them to it and their lack of belief in gods are not considered equivalent. And then just put forward some good arguments for your social justice stuff, and get everybody converted to that, and now you've got all three goals covered. Anyway, that's my advice. Take it or leave it.